I'm Lisa. It's great to be here, and I kind of just want to understand the audience. I know it's a little noisy out there, but how many of you out here are founders? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you decided to put your life on hold? Maybe you just graduated college and you forgone that big corporate job, or you left that job to start something and pursue a vision. And how many of you are doing that with a team of 10, 5, or maybe it's actually just you? All right, and how many of you are doing this with little to no funding, up against big industry titans who have very deep pockets to spend and test? You're all crazy. Or at least that's really what I would have thought had you asked me a number of years ago. Just to give some context, I started off in the corporate world. I worked with companies like Estee Lauder companies, PVH and Calvin Klein, Boston Consulting Group, and they were the most established players in the market. But a couple of years ago, I transitioned over to the venture capital world and started working with founders like you guys. And what I've seen time and time again are these small companies taking on huge industries. We've seen Uber tackle the transportation industry. We've seen Airbnb tackle a huge hotel industry. Dollar Shave Club going up against Gillette, the industry incumbent. And I see this every day as I'm working with founders. They're time and time again going up against these big guys and winning. And I kept thinking over and over, how in the world is this the case? And I came to the conclusion it's actually not just because you might have a better product or service. It's because of certain systematic underlying factors about being an underdog and about being a founder that position you, if taken advantage of, for that success. And I want to share with you a couple of those systematic advantages in hopes that will help you in your fight against these big titans. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are a few. So what does this mean? Well, big companies have been working on the same problems and thinking about their industry for years. You have people who have been in their companies for 10, 20, 30 years. So how is it that a founder walks up one day to an investor and says, I'm gonna win and beat these people who have 30 years of experience? And the answer lies in this quote here. The answer is because experts, these people who have entrenched in their industry, stopped asking the really basic questions because they're thinking within the constraints of their industry. They're thinking about what hasn't worked in the past and what can't work in the future. As a non-expert and a founder, you're thinking about, well, why not? And what about this? And what about that? And that actually ends up making all of the difference. So, a quick example of this. In the history of the world, there have only been 3 institutions that have gone to space, and all of these have been governments. The most recent, China. China recently sent a rover to the moon called the Jade Rabbit not too long ago. And for China, this was gonna be a huge moment for them. They put in billions of dollars in building this rover. The press was going crazy. It was gonna be this amazing, amazing story for them. And there was a lot of that buildup and clearly tons of money going into this. But they launched up, and after just a little while, game over. It literally landed on the moon, started driving across the moon, and all of a sudden hit a pothole, or a crater as the experts call it. And in 5 minutes, the mission was literally over. They had to stop, they couldn't even bring it back. Meanwhile, back in the US and back with some private companies, they started thinking, all right, since this mission failed, what can we do to make the next mission to the moon successful? And there's now been a crop of private companies coming to the surface and trying to actually fly to the moon, not even governments. And there's one company in particular, little company out of Cape Canaveral in the US, called Moon Express. And as they were sitting and talking about how in the world could we solve this problem that the big guys identified, that clearly rovers are gonna go into craters. And people postulated about, let's get better topographical mapping, let's get better sensors so that we can anticipate these craters. This team sat there and asked one really, really basic question. Doesn't the moon only have a sixth of the gravity of Earth? Yeah. So why are we trying to drive across the moon's surface when we could just hop and use that lack of gravity to our advantage? Super basic question, yet that made all the difference in the world. So this is China's Jade Rabbit. As you can see, it has the wheels that's driving along the surface, and this is Moon Express's. And it hops with little air jets. So Moon Express is planning on landing on the moon in 2017, but the more important point here is that they were able to ask this basic question and then come up with a wave of opportunity. This new rover is actually now going to become the standard to get to the moon. I have not failed 10,000 times. I have not failed once. I have succeeded in proving that those 10,000 ways will not work. When I have eliminated the ways that will not work, I will find the ways that will. So, what does that mean for you? This whole quote is about experimentation. And I'm not trying to make the point that corporations are unable to experiment. In fact, they're really, really good at experimenting and running tests because they have the budgets and the resources to do so. And they're also fully aware of the problems that they're trying to solve in the market. The difference is there are certain systematic institutional barriers that corporations have to execute on this experimentation, that founders, being underdogs and being people not entrenched in an industry with stakeholders like Wall Street and different players and their manufacturers and distribution channels, don't face. They simply don't face them. So that leaves you as an entrepreneur with a world of opportunity where you can experiment and try new models that are too risky for an incumbent to try. So I'm going to take you to an industry I worked for a long time in the beauty industry. Back in 2011, 2012, there was a new trend going on in the beauty world, and in a lot of worlds for that matter. And that trend was that social media and YouTube was becoming super important for consumers to learn about the products that they were trying to buy. And, Estee Lauder and L'Oreal and all of the big guys knew that this was happening, and they talked a lot about it. How can we make sure we don't miss out on a huge customer acquisition channel? But they were too scared to launch anything meaningful to really capitalize on this trend. The reason is because in the beauty industry, especially with luxury products, a channel like YouTube is mass. And they were afraid to degrade the brands by launching on channels like YouTube. So what happened was that a woman, Michelle Phan, started quietly building this empire on YouTube, doing her beauty blogs and beauty experiments on her own face. And she was able to turn that really rich audience into a set of consumers and subscribers to her and her business called Ipsy. Ipsy today is a beauty empire. They have 100,000 new subscribers each month, all coming from that original organic following on YouTube. They're profitable and valued at $500 million. And the success was because Michelle, a founder, an underdog, had nothing to lose. She was able to launch and build a business around this organic channel on YouTube and try it out. And guess what? It worked really, really well. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I know it's kind of a funny quote there, but it actually really does reflect a very powerful strategy out there. So, as an underdog, you're able to be friends with literally everyone because you pose zero risk. What are you going to do as a single founder, a team of 2, of 5? How are you going to take on me, take on an incumbent in the industry? Nobody's thinking about that. They don't even have time to worry about that. So as an underdog, you have the opportunity to work with the very people that you plan to disrupt. And that's really cool and a huge advantage. So I'm going to take you guys back to the 1980s. And this was a time when IBM was the market leader in personal computers. And Microsoft was a little startup, like a lot of your companies out here. IBM came to Microsoft and said, hey, maybe there's a potential partnership we could work out here. Microsoft, you're writing all these operating systems. We're just trying to sell the big dog, the personal computer. We don't care about that software. Can you build that? And Microsoft said, yeah. Microsoft was super excited because, hey, this is a big company with lots of customers, and they're gonna get all this access right away, just from writing an operating software and partnering with the big guy. Keep your friends closer and enemies closer. So in 1985, when IBM asked Microsoft to rewrite the operating system when they were launching their new personal computer, Microsoft again said yes, but they said, we're also going to continue to sell our computers and operating software through our own direct channel. By this time, they had started to build a little bit of a brand and a following. In the end, Microsoft Windows eventually overshadowed the IBM computer and operating software in terms of sales. When Microsoft launched several versions of their own Windows in the 1990s, they had captured over 90% of the world's personal computer market. And that all happened because Microsoft realized, hey, we're underdogs, no one's afraid of us, so we're gonna use that, we're gonna leverage the shit out of that. We're gonna take advantage of the fact that this big guy was gonna give us access to customers. And so it could really pay to be an underdog. Don't forget that being the new kid on the block means that no one's afraid to lend a hand to you, to partner with you, and potentially help take your business to the next level, just like IBM did with Microsoft. So while being an underdog is hard and it requires a constant hustle, there are a couple of different critical realities that I went through just before that provide an opportunity and a ripe stomping ground for underdogs, founders like you, to win. And it's because of those realities that I believe that if you properly take advantage of them, the underdog will always win. Thank you.